John the Baptist came here eating strange things, looking strange, and pointing to people to Jesus. If that's not Phil Robertson,
sounds like
I don't
Phil
know
Robertson.
what better to do.
When I first saw him, I said, "Now that I like right there."
Yeah.
Think about it. Jesus was going to save the world, and the one appointed, the point man, was a guy
That looked like it.
You know, I just love what I'm looking at right now because I know just where you are. You are in a warehouse and you're surrounded by duck calls and camouflage and all kinds of crazy things that I had never seen before I went to Louisiana. I remember my kids said, as we were driving in our rental car on your property, Phil, we came through that gate, and all of a sudden, I'm looking at moss hanging from the trees. I'm seeing swamps. I'm envisioning getting eaten by alligators. I thought for sure I was going to hear banjos soon. And I came up on your house with those dogs barking at me, and I said, guys, we need to turn around and get out of here. And they said, no, this is it. This is the Duck Dynasty house. And we went inside, and boy, the rest is history. We've been friends ever since.
That first line of defense, when the dogs bark, you can get your weapon in your hand. Don't move, just stand, just wait. And you're waiting on what the dogs are barking at, what's going on out there. So they alert me in our neck of the woods that someone is in the yard.
That's right. What I had a chance to experience for the first time was we went on a squirrel hunt with Uncle Si. You and I went out on a boat, and we were bringing in those hoop nets with all of those fish. And we even cooked up some squirrel and some catfish. And I had a great time. I had never known this way of life before. How would you describe life in Louisiana for those who grow up in the city and have never been to the swamps before?
To me, I'd just rather keep life simple. Fear God, love your neighbor, do what's right. Life is what you make of it. So I told Miss Kay, I said, Miss Kay, find us a place down on the river. I said, I have an idea. And I said, now listen carefully. I said, my plan is this. If I teach school, and the degree I have in education, Louisiana Tech, if I teach school, it'll top out at about $35,000, $40,000 a year. And I said, and that's it. I said, I'd rather go down there on the river. You find me a place on the river. And I said, I'll fish the river, sell the fish, we'll survive. I said, we can survive off $250, $300 a week by me selling fish. And I reached in my pocket and I said, you see this duck call? I said, I made that. I said, I'll get this duck call on the market. I said, and you'll have that long green in your pocket. And I said, everybody be happy. So she's looking at me. She said, let's do it. I said, find me the place. She found the place down on the river. And when we talking to the real estate lady, I said, let me ask you something, because when I walked up there, I was looking at the water line, the watermarks on those trees in my yard. So I told that woman, I said, let me ask you something. Does this flood in here? And she said, she stopped, and she said, Mr. Robertson, I'm not going to lie to you. This floods a lot. I said, well, we don't want it unless it does flood. We want the floods in the yard. Good for fish, good for ducks. She said, Mr. Robertson, you're going to love this place. So I've been here ever since, My kids got rich and famous. They all started building bigger houses, but I still live in the same house I started in, enjoying the great outdoors, the love of God, following Jesus. It literally is a blast, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Not so much. I haven't been shopping in a decade. Just
Probably longer. Probably longer.
Maybe longer.
Well, there's a lot of that sounds appealing. And I love your story. I know you and Miss Kay met when you were 14 and 15 years old, and you're still together, and you're so focused and centered around God and your family and your country. Some people don't know that back in the 1970s, you were a college quarterback in Louisiana. You're in college. You have the demands of college football, and a son comes along, Al, who's sitting right next to you. How did you juggle all of that and cope with it?
So I basically was a sinful young man, no doubt about it. We basically said, we got this baby. Miss Kay said, don't you think we ought to get married? I said, oh, the Almighty knows we're married, so, we won't worry about that. It ended up, we finally went off and I got a marriage license. That cost Miss Kay. I didn't have any money, but she paid for it. $10 for the blood test and $15 to the justice of the peace. Well, the wedding went like this. We walked in and he looked at me. He said, "You want her?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Sign right here. Give me $15." So my wedding was short to the point.
And as you turned your life toward God and away from sin, what changes began to materialize in your life?
All my old friends, when they finally found out what happened to me, because when I came to Jesus, that's when I went down on the river, started fishing the river 24/7 in the outdoors. And so then I got the duck call on the market. But when I ran up on my buddies, they finally located where I was. And I told them, I said, "I think y'all are looking for the wrong person. You're looking for the old Phil Robertson." I said, he died. I was speaking of my baptism, and he was buried. This is the new one. I'm not going anywhere with y'all ever again. That's all over. Hit the road. So they all hung their head, got back in their rigs, and drove away. One of them, 12 years later, asked me to tell him the story on what changed my life so much. I told him the good news about Jesus. He became a son of God, and he died in about 2 months.
Wow.
That's how close he cut it. But he made it.
Phil, you experienced another profound moment and relationship in your life when you discovered a few years ago that a woman named Phyllis, who had come into your life, actually turns out to be your very own daughter. What's that story, and how did that impact the rest of your family?
One of them drunken nights, that's how she was produced, some drunken night somewhere. I have no idea where. But when we gave her DNA checks, they said, "But Dad, Al checked it out." He said, "I think she's for real." I said, "Tell her to come on down, fly her down here." So we provided the airplane ticket, flew her down. And my first meeting was, she walked over to me and I looked in her eyes and I said, "Yep, I think you're the one." So after 45 years, she shows up out of my past, and I gave her a house and she lives next door to us. She's a good, godly woman.
How did the rest of your family react to that?
They reacted, I would say, "Al, what do you think? Just tell her to come on down." There was no grudges about what in the world you're going to do. So you tell.
Well, I was just going to say, Kirk, once we went public with the story, one of the tabloids came out and had all this, how tabloids are. I'm sure they've never said anything bad about you, Kirk, but they had all this stuff about how jealous we were and blah, 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 blah. And it was all just so fake because we loved her even before we met her. And it was amazing. And so she has just fit right in with our family. She's changed Dad. Dad was, he had boys, and so he was different with us than he is with her. So it's been a really cool thing to watch.
Miss Kay said, "I thought it would be a boy, but it's a girl." She said, "I knew someone was coming out of all them wild streaks you were in on." I said, "Hey, honey," I said, "all we can do is love her." And here we go. She's married to an artist. She's a nurse. So, but she said something told her as a child that you need to walk with Jesus in mind. Something told her that. Even as a young girl, she said, "I had no idea that my real dad wouldn't show up until I was 40-something years old, but that's the way it turned out."
You know, Phil, one of the things that I just love about getting to know you and your whole family is even though you might look a little scary on the outside with that beard and the bandana around your head and you're out there with the shotguns and with all them ducks and alligators, you have such a tender heart for God and for your family. Why have you decided to make family at the center of your life?
It's because of my witnessing America's young people and America's family structure, and I'm looking at, to me, is devastation beyond what I ever thought would happen. I never thought we would be this, Al, what's the word for it? This so prone to deny Jesus, the Son of God, and His love for us. So I've been on both sides of this thing, following Jesus. It's the hardest thing that can happen to the human race, in my opinion, is to find peace of mind. And it's not going to be found on the current course that America's in unless there's a mass repentance. And pretty shortly, you won't even recognize this constitutional republic we call America.
Al, I want to know, what was it like for you growing up as the firstborn son in the Robertson family, especially before your dad knew the Lord?
Well, you know, it's funny when you were asking Dad earlier about the college campus. I look back and realize that miracles still happen because I was raised on a college campus by two teenagers and a bunch of other people surrounding them who were teenagers. In fact, Dad had some of his old football buddies down a couple of years ago, and they were describing to me how they would go to the commissary, get extra milk because they were athletes, they were football players. So I realized it really did take a village of people to make sure that I got, into those early years. Obviously, Dad was, I don't remember much obviously about the college years, but that period of time from when I was 5 to 10 was when Dad was at his worst. Therefore, it was really tough to watch, their marriage, Mom and Dad's marriage, sort of melt down. And me being the oldest, I had the most memories of that. But I'll tell you what else it's done, though, Kirk. It's made me appreciate the new, Phil and Kay, the new mom and dad.
You really saw the difference.
You see the transition. You really know how powerful God's love is and forgiveness. And when you see life change at the level, I tell people all the time, my dad went from the biggest heathen in South Arkansas and North Louisiana to John the Baptist overnight. I mean, it just, from my world, from a 10-year-old's perspective, that's what happened, because all of a sudden he went from people running from him to running to him because he had something to take.
And now he eats a steady diet of locusts and honey, and he looks just like John the Baptist.
John the Baptist came here eating strange things, looking strange, and pointing to people to Jesus. If that's not Phil Robertson,
that sounds like Phil Robertson.
When I first saw him, I said, "Now that I like right there." Yeah. Think about it. Jesus was going to save the world, and the one appointed, the point man, was a guy
that looked like you.
That's right.
Me. I'm like, well, maybe I'm on the right track here.
That's right. Coming in the spirit of Elijah. I love it. And that's you, Phil, for sure. Al, what was your reaction when your dad suddenly became a follower of Jesus? Were you happy? Were you amazed? Were you skeptical?
It was amazing, Kirk, because we didn't, when you're a kid, you don't really know what your parents, there's stuff going on you don't know about. And they shield you as much as they can. And so obviously Mom and Dad have been talking. But from our perspective, we just look up one day and Dad drives up in the truck with the TV in the back, and all the things that we didn't have, and he's like back in our lives. And so we were thrilled. And then we watched, Mom would take us every night. It's our pastor came over and he would sit down with Dad, and they sat down 3 straight nights. And so Mom didn't want us interrupting or, messing this up. So she would take us and we'd go look at, so we didn't have any money, but we'd look right at the store for a couple hours. We'd come back. The third night we came back, there was a sign on the door of our little apartment, and it said, "We're at the building, come on down." And we all knew what that meant, that Dad was probably about to be baptized. And so he had finally accepted Christ. And so we went there and we witnessed that night. And I don't remember it specifically, but Mom said we were all in tears. She does say that Jay said, "Does this mean the devil's left our daddy?" And she said, "It does, but now he's probably still got some growing to do, so be ready."
Yeah.
But that was our reaction. And we knew that our lives were about to change, and they did in a big way. And it was about a year later before we moved out on the river.
And then you talk about how you had your own prodigal son season. What was it that you were running to or running from?
I don't know if maybe there was, looking back on it, not trying to psychoanalyze it, but I had been really a solid kid. Mom had depended on me a lot to take care of my brothers, when their lives were upside down. So I think I was good for a long time. And then finally, when our family kind of got on the right path, this happens a lot that I've seen in all my years of being a pastor. Sometimes Satan just kind of turns the scope on someone else. And I was that person. I was open to that. I was kind of a double secret agent because I was in church. I was singing the songs. On the outside, I looked great, but on the inside, it was just getting darker. And so I was planning what I was going to be doing every weekend. And so Mom and Dad, who had only seen the good in me, they just couldn't believe it that, when I finally got to the worst possible place. And so Dad sat me down. I was 17. I just graduated high school. He basically challenged me and said, if you're going to be here, you're going to be a part of this family, you're going to have to change the way you're living. Otherwise, you just need to get out there and make your own way.
Do your thing.
And so you do your thing. And so I was, prideful and arrogant at the time. And so I took off, but I look back on that now, and that was love speech. I mean, he was giving me the challenge to do the right thing, but I just wasn't ready at that point. So I still had to get a little bit deeper. And just like that kid in Luke 15, I had to go some other place to figure out who God was.
And then you realized that you were there in the pigsty and you wanted to make a turnaround. What was it? What was it that finally made the light bulb go off in your mind?
It was a crowbar, Kirk, that did it for me. I was on the wrong end of it.
Tell me more.
I realized I had been dating this girl, and we were both telling lies. And so her husband shows up and tries to separate my head from the rest of my body one day. And I realized in that moment, I obviously didn't die and wasn't hurt too bad. But I realized in that moment, police are there. I mean, it's like something off of TV. I was in New Orleans. And I looked at that moment and I said, you know what? If I stay here, I'm going to die. I'm going to be another statistic of New Orleans. And then I thought, and if I die, what would happen to me? And I knew where I was, where my heart was, I was in a bad way. And so I made a decision on that. I was just like Paul on the road to Damascus, but I was on the road to New Orleans and both going to wrong places that I needed to go home. And so just like that kid did in Luke 15, I thought about home. I thought about Mom and Dad. I had my speech prepared about how I'd prove myself and all these things, just like that kid did. And when I got home, they just embraced me. They didn't even let me give my speech. Dad said, welcome home, Al. We got duck calls to build. So I said that night we had the fattened catfish because a lost son had come home.
Man, you've experienced some serious reconciliation and restoration in your life. I mean, with your dad, with your Heavenly Father, and then also you've talked openly about the restoration and reconciliation you've experienced with your wife. You're married, you've got a great marriage and a marriage ministry, but it wasn't always that way. Can you talk a little bit about the rough road that you two walked down?
Yeah, I met Lisa when I was in that bad period of my teenage years, and so I was terrible to her. I broke her heart. When I came to the Lord, I knew I wanted to be married. I knew I wanted to marry a woman that would really love me for me, and Lisa was it. The problem was she had a lot of baggage in her past. She had been molested as a child. She'd had an abortion, when we were apart, and so she had all this stuff that was there and never really got dealt with. So when I roll back into town and I'm a brand new Christian now, and she's always been in love with me. So she just kind of comes into the family, but really never embraced Christ. But we were her salvation. I was her Lord. But the problem is with that, anytime you put anything above Christ, it's not going to work out, not in the long term. And so it didn't for her and it didn't for us. So we're 15 years into our marriage, and I find out she's been having an affair. She's working for our company. So now all of a sudden, she's lost everything in a moment. I don't want her around me. The family doesn't want her around them. our church, there's a divide there because I'm working for the church at the time. So in that moment of just, I've lost everything, she finally, out of desperation, called out to God. And she was laying in our backyard, and she looked up and she said, I don't even know if you're real, but if you are, I need you to rescue me. And he did. He met her there in my backyard. And so after a few months of me observing, and really most people around me, including my family, were like, oh, she's not going to change.
Yeah.
You've been hurt before. They were trying to lift me up because they were hurt. And so I felt sort of just alone in my decision, but I knew I had the capacity to forgive her, and I did. And then we started building what we have now. And so 23 years later, I would tell you that I would go through everything again to get to the place where we are today, what we're able to do with other people.
And you had seen the transformation that the power of God had made in your father's life. I mean, he went from this carousing, drunk, a guy who's in all the wrong places with all the wrong people, and then you see God turn him into a new creature in Christ. That must have given you the hope in your mind that God could also transform your broken wife. Was that part of what went into you being able to forgive her?
I think no doubt about it. I mean, one is I saw my mom forgive my dad. And this is years before we ever knew there was a daughter one day we would meet. But I watched that. And then I watched my dad accept the forgiveness of God. And even though he had a hard time with it because he didn't trust himself, ultimately he trusted God. And I think, Kurt, that's really was the roadmap for me to trust Lisa again. Because, when your wife betrays you at that level, you think, how can I ever trust her again? And if it's just up to human beings, you wouldn't be able to. But when you trust the Almighty and the way he forgives us, there's a pathway to be able to forgive someone at that level. But I also knew if I didn't forgive in a way that I'm not going to bring this up every time we have an argument, it would never work. And so I asked the Almighty to give me the capacity to forgive as he forgives, where he says, I will remember their sins no more. And to this day, I've held that vow to him and to my wife.
Wow, I know that's difficult, and we look at divorce and forgiveness and remarriage and God's love for the people of Israel and how He's constantly taken her back and she's unfaithful and all of that, and yet sometimes marriages fall apart and there is no forgiveness there, and people split and they go different ways, and that's a very difficult thing. What would you say to a couple who's in that position right now? Someone's discovered that their spouse has been unfaithful to them. What advice would you give them?
Well, I would definitely say don't rush to end it. Wait and see what happens to them and to you, and leave some room, a capacity that you may can work through this. It's interesting, Kirk. I don't know if I've ever told you this when you were down here, but when your movie came out about marriage all those years ago, was it something fire? You were a fireman in the movie.
Yeah,
whatever that movie
fireproof,
was.
waterproof, something like that. Yeah,
fireproof. Yeah, fireproof. When that was very close. That was much closer, in years to when Lisa and I went through all that. And I just remember we went and watched that movie. We both just wept while we watched it because it spoke so much to who we were as a couple, to just try to get through the fire. The idea was, can you just walk through it, and can God help you? And so that's what I would tell couples is that, look, obviously the Bible says that marital unfaithfulness sometimes will divide a couple, and people will divorce. You just don't have the capacity. God understands that, as much as he doesn't want that for us, that he understands that, but it doesn't mean you have to. You can work through anything. And we know this is true because look at what God does for us. I mean, we're called the bride of Christ. And so he put his relationship with the church in the same capacity as a relationship in a marriage. So if you're telling me that he can work it out with us, then I'm telling you, a couple, you can work it out. Just give God an opportunity to do what he does best, and give it another day. Give it some more time.